On 100.9 WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. What's going on, Rochester? You are listening to Evidence of Design here at 100.9 FM WXIR. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Jason Taylor, and I'm your host, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Matt Treadwell.
That's me.
If you have listened to Evidence of Design in the past, you know that we love to talk about income and wealth inequality in the United States. We wonder where it comes from and what its effects are. Matt and I think that income and wealth inequality is preeminently important for understanding and figuring out what other forms of injustice are happening in society, whether that be race, based upon race, gender, even disability. We think that income and wealth inequality is a useful framework for trying to figure out what's going on, because there's a lot of things going on in the world right now, and some of them are pretty troubling, and we think that income and wealth inequality can help to explain those things. Did I get that right, Matt?
Yeah.
We talk about a few other things sometimes.
We switch it up.
And today we are going to switch it up a little bit. So on today's show, we're going to be talking about the film 22 July that was just released last September, so about a month ago, by director Paul Greengrass. And 22 July is a film that covers the events that happened on the 22nd of July in 2011 in Oslo, Norway. And so that was when a lone wolf terrorist carried out a series of attacks that ended up claiming 77 lives, and we're going to be talking about that film and talking about the implications of the film with the emphasis on how society responds to egregious and terrible acts of violence. So what do we do as a society? How do we respond when an individual severely breaks a social contract? How do we as a society respond to mass incidences of trauma? And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, talking about the film 22 July. Did I get that one right, Matt?
Yes, the film is called 22 July. Not July 22nd, not... I don't have anything else.
But folks, if you are welcome to participate in this discussion absolutely all the time here at 100.9 FM WXAR. We want your participation, and you can participate in a few ways.
Do you watch movies?
We'd love to know that. But beyond that, you can give us a call, 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. Give us a call this hour. We'd love to hear from you about how should we respond to incidences of trauma as a society. Also, you can find us on YouTube at the Evidence of Design YouTube channel, and you can email us throughout the show, evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com. evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com. We also have a Twitter, we also have a Facebook, we also have all of that good stuff. So you can participate in a number of ways, but listeners, thanks for being here, and we want to hear from you this hour. Matt, ready to take it away?
I'm ready.
Let's do it.
Into the chasm gaping we, mirrors multi-reflecting this between spun-stained sheet and odorous whim. Hammer eye flick shudder within, assist me to walk away in sin. Where is the string that Theseus laid? Find me out this labyrinth land. I think I'm born.
Matt, who divined that song right there?
That's Bauhaus with the song In the Flat Field off their 1980 debut album, In the Flat Field.
Bauhaus. That's is that an art movement?
I think it's a museum, or it's a building of some kind.
Yeah, there's some German movement, like a German art movement or something about that.
Yeah.
I think it's architecture art that, yeah, Bauhaus. But that's cool. What kind of time frame do they make their music, Bauhaus?
80s.
80s.
Yeah.
You do love the 80s music?
I do love those golden 80s.
Is that the best decade of music?
I don't know. I like a lot of music from the late 70s, early 80s in England. It's kind of my thing. Gets me.
I have a serious question.
Ask me, Jason.
When we think nowadays about sort of decades, we always kind of start with, it seems like post-World War II, right? Post-World War II, because that's when kind of modern society started with all of our technology and stuff. But, I mean, was there music back in the 1700s, back in the 1200s, when it was like, 1230 was different than 1240 in music? Or was like 1730 different than 1740?
I don't know enough about that to really say, but I think that if I had to wager a guess, I would say that ideas traveled a lot slower back then, and that movements in art and literature and music lasted a lot longer because of that. With the proliferation of technology in the 20th and the 21st century, with the sudden ability to spread ideas across vast distances much more quickly, I feel like not only has our society increased in pace, but also, I mean, I guess art is a reflection of that, but art itself is like moving much more quickly. There's always new stuff around the corner.
Yeah, I just wonder how useful it is to break things apart in decades, because I think we do that a lot now in terms of fashion or music. We speak as if each decade is its own standalone piece.
Right.
And I know that that's just a useful way to talk about things. Like,
right.
You need some sort of hook or framework, but...
Well, it's interesting because, like, in a way you're putting a framework over something that happened organically, and you're, like, dividing it up in these arbitrary, to some extent, divisions. But at the same time, that's one way that we process, I guess, time, it would seem. And if the way we process time is an invention of our own, just like the way we think about culture and create culture is an invention of our own, maybe that's not something to necessarily dismiss or not take stock in.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of time, we are on today's show of Evidence of Design here at 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. We are talking about the film 22 July. Again, this film just came out in September, and the film is directed by Paul Greengrass, who, among other things, has directed like the Bourne series and Captain Phillips. So this movie, 22 July, is based off of the real events that happened on the 22nd of July in 2011 in Oslo, Norway. This is when a lone wolf terrorist by the name of Anders Behring Breivik carried out a couple of attacks. The first attack happened with a car bomb. He used a car bomb, this individual, outside of the Prime Minister's government office in Oslo, and the bomb exploded and killed around 8 individuals. And then as society was responding to that attack and figuring out what was going on, Anders drove his car down to a nearby island where they were having a workers' youth league. So it's sort of the Norwegian Labour Party. There was a summer camp going on for the workers' youth league, and he took a ferry across to that island, disguised himself as a police officer, and then ended up taking the lives of around 60, mainly children. 69, yeah, mainly children. And so all in all, I believe he took around 77 lives, and he
wounded several more, like over
200, I think, yeah. And this individual went to court, so he surrendered himself to police when they finally responded. and he was put on trial, and he sort of self-professed the reason why he did these attacks is because he was a member of the alt-right, the European nationalism. He didn't like immigration, and so his main points was he wanted sort of a ban on immigration to Norway. He wanted an end to forced multiculturalism. He wanted Islam out of Europe, and he was a member of sort of these subgroups like the Knights Templar, I believe, or other fringe groups such as that. And so long story short is he was a European or Norwegian white nationalist who didn't like some of the leftist movements going on in Norway, Marxists, leftism, labor parties, and so he ended up carrying out these terror attacks to prove a point that, well, Norway should be taking a stronger stance to become white and ethno-nationalist. And so the film 22 July, it's a docudrama, effectively.
Yeah. It does depict, or it is informed and based upon the actual terror attacks that happened on 22nd of July in 2011. But much of the plot that the movie follows is actually based on a book called One of Us, The Story of a Massacre in Norway and Its Aftermath by, and I'm going to butcher this name,
Norwegian.
Asni Serstad, I think.
Sure.
She's a famous Norwegian journalist, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And so Matt and I, we want to talk about this because we're trying to wonder how should society respond when there are sort of egregious breaks in the social contract. So we've talked before on the show that the social contract is this idea. I believe it came out of really the Enlightenment, but it had traces for centuries, if not thousands of years before that. But the idea of the social contract is that all of us live within a society and have to perhaps give up certain freedoms or certain abilities or make certain small sacrifices so that we can all kind of live together peacefully.
Such as not killing each other.
Such as not killing each other. Because some sort of pessimistic ideas about society that humans are naturally evil, humans are naturally bad, humans will naturally want to look out for themselves and be self-centered, and therefore we have to give up certain freedoms, give power to a government, and have the government have a monopoly on power such that the government can threaten us with violence if we're not acting the way that we should be. So that sort of conservative idea of the social contract is that humans are bad, and therefore we need some other entity that we all agree upon who has the ability to kill us if we act out. And that's the idea of a government in a particular limited way. So the government has a monopoly on violence and can make us do what we need to do.
Yeah.
However, there's other sort of more liberal notions of the social contract where, we all pay taxes and we all are in this together and are supporting one another, and we have a social safety net, and we build roads, bridges, schools, fund a military, things like that we all do together in order to try to support one another.
And those are some broad strokes on what like two very separate ideals can be. There's obviously endless minutiae of differences in opinion that people can take on what exactly the social contract should look like and why we need it.
Yeah. And so today we're talking about wherever you fall in that spectrum. We're talking about what happens, what should we do as a society when that social contract is broken? How should we respond to it? How should we respond to that? And so in this instance in Norway, when this individual...
Well, before we get into that,
yeah.
Do you want to talk about the movie?
Yeah, absolutely. So Matt, we'll spend a little bit of time sort of talking about, critiquing the movie a little bit, just talking about the movie in broad strokes. So if you are, this will spoil the movie, but again, it's kind of a documentary. So
you know how it ends.
You know how it ends. So we will be talking about the movie a little bit here. So there will be spoilers, of course, if you're interested. And the movie is available on Netflix again, 22 July.
Yep.
And so the film covers this lone wolf terrorist, Anders Behring Breivik, and
it starts out with images of him preparing for his attack, and it's interspersed with cuts between Anders, or the actor playing Anders, preparing to commit these terrible crimes, and then shots and images of the youth camp where all these fresh-faced young teenagers are getting ready for what they think will be a fun camping trip. And it's very sad and very, I don't know about you, Jason. We watched this separately, but I was like, my heart was in my throat because I was just not prepared for what was about to happen. I mean, I knew what was coming, and it was like sheer terror and dismay and just this awful oppression.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that because of mass media and because of certain mass shootings around the country, I think all of us in some small way in our brain and our lives have to be fearful of just sort of spontaneous acts of violence. And we know that this has happened for all of human history, sort of spontaneous acts of violence. There are shootings and homicides every day in Rochester, etc. But these sort of indiscriminate civilian killings on a mass scale, and yeah, I had a really hard time watching the first, half an hour of the movie, just because you know what's going to happen, and it's horrible, and you just have this horrible sense of just complete powerlessness, and that's really the worst of it, where there's these sort of terroristic attacks on powerless civilians is, it's quite sad.
That was honestly the most powerful emotional response that the film generated in me, was that first half an hour of sheer terror and horror. And I think a lot of that, it's certainly that feeling is certainly established by the knowledge that this happened, so that this occurred. But I also feel that, it is filmed competently enough to also generate those feelings. It's not just that it actually happened, that these are based on true events. It is difficult to watch, and I mean that. I think I mean that in a complimentary way, because I think that's like the point. It's not supposed to be something that we're comfortable with.
Yeah. And that's why I really wanted to talk about this movie, actually, because I heard some reviews about it, and I appreciate the way that the director is portraying these events. So let me preface this in saying that I think there's a lot of very legitimate concerns out there about mass media or media personalities, such as you and I, Matt, who essentialize non-essential, who essentialize bad things, right? By talking about this terrorist incident in 2011 of this alt-right white nationalist, are we therefore giving him what he wants,
right,
which is attention to his cause? I think that is a very legitimate concern.
Yep.
The point of talking about this movie, though, and having this conversation is because I think that, at least how the director portrayed it, and at least of my very limited knowledge of Norway and Norwegian culture and people, is that the society responded in a really positive, I think, way to these horrible incidents. So the idea is not to give credence to white nationalism at all. I think we know what that stands for, and hopefully everyone knows what side they fall on, and we're trying to prevent those who believe in those ideologies from gaining more foothold. But the idea is to really wonder, how is it that we should respond? Because we have plenty of incidences in our country where we need a moral leader to guide us, and sometimes, we are guided in better ways than others, and we'll talk about those towards the end of the show. But yeah, man, I think that watching this movie is very tough. But I at least left the movie with some small bit of strength or optimism, and there's not much there because, again, having this conversation, how should we as a society respond to terrible incidences? There's no one easy answer, but I at least help to see better ways than others.
Yeah, I kind of had a different reaction to the movie where, I mean, I read some criticism afterward, and I think that's informing my opinion to an extent. But unfortunately, I found the most captivating part of the film to be Anders. Like, what is he thinking? Why would he do this? And I agree with you in that it's very important to not give the real Anders what he wants, which is attention. And but at the same time, it's a catch-22 because these things obviously need to be talked about. Because if we don't discuss it, then we're ill-prepared for when it happens again, or we are not really doing enough, I feel, to prevent it from happening as little as possible. But I was really hoping. What I wanted to see from the movie, which I didn't feel like I necessarily got, was a new perspective on what to make of this, on what to some insight, I suppose, into not just Anders' motives, or Breivik's motives, but also how to move forward. And the way the film is structured, it sort of pits this one survivor named Vidler, I believe.
Village.
Village?
Yeah, Village. V-I-L-A-J, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Villiers.
Villiers.
Villiers Hansen, who's like
We only watched the whole movie and can't remember how to
I
pronounce
know.
his name.
He's like the main character, too. We're terrible. But, so Villiers Hansen, he's one of the youths attending the camp. He's like maybe like, I don't know, 15, 16 years old.
Yeah, he's in high school.
Yeah. He's a kid, basically. And he's, his mom, at the time of the shooting, is running in a mayoral election in his hometown, which he later wins. But the film kind of like sets up Villiers as the sort of, I guess, opposing force to Breivik, in that he's a survivor. He is horribly wounded. He almost dies. He's shot 5 times, I believe, by Breivik, and loses a lot of movement in his left arm, loses sight in his right eye because he has a bullet explodes in his head, and he has bullet fragments next to his brainstem that are too
dangerous to remove.
Right.
Too complicated.
If they get shifted, the doctors say at any time in the wrong way, he could die instantly. And that's the reality that he has to come to terms with. These, not just that these awful injuries that Breivik's attack has left him with, but also the fact that he loses, I think, 2 of his best friends in the event who are murdered. And so it's set up. It starts off with this horrible attack, and basically the rest of the movie is kind of like this dual narrative of really how's everybody dealing with this, but it focuses mainly on Villiers and his sort of, I guess, I don't want to say redemption, but his sort of like return to some level of normalcy, his struggle to get over it. He's obviously suffering from PTSD and the emotional trauma of what happened to him and his friends. And so I view him as like this. These are the 2 main characters at work, Villiers and Breivik. And I don't know. I was kind of, I understand why they did that, but I felt like that was stereotypical in a way, and I needed more from it than just one kid's journey, I suppose. I was really interested to see like how the government responded, for example. And there are a few scenes of the Prime Minister ordering an independent investigation to see like if they could have done more to stop Breivik in time, if and there is a scene where they find out that yes, and this is true to real life too, I believe, where they found that for example, the components that Breivik used to make the bomb, they could have stopped him from that, and then also that the police response to Utoya, the island where he shot up the students, was slower than it could have been. And there's a scene where the Prime Minister is meeting with the families of the children who were slain, and he's like, "I'm sorry. We could have done better. We should have done better. We failed you." And the parents are like, "We feel the fault lies with the terrorists," which as well they should. But that's basically, those 2 scenes are really all that are devoted to that. And I felt like that was the crux of what I wanted to learn more about, was this larger response to the issue at hand. But I've talked a lot, Jason, so.
Well, that's all right. And what we're talking about now is the film 22 July. It came out in September, and you can find it on Netflix. It covers the series of real events on the 22nd of July in 2011 in Oslo, Norway, where a lone wolf terrorist, Anders Breivik, carried out a series of attacks that ended up taking the lives of 77 people, most of them children, members of a leftist Labour Party. And we were talking about this film in the context of how should we as a society respond to really terrible events, particularly terrorism, white nationalism. How should we as a society respond? And you can participate in the discussion, 585-219-8889. We would love your participation here at 100.9 FM WXIR. Matt, it's interesting that you say what your response is. You're viewing the film like, all right, here's this terrorist, here's Breivik the terrorist, versus the protagonist the film sets up, Viljar. And you know, every film kind of needs a protagonist, I guess, so it was a convenient way to film. But I actually found, I think what I took away from the movie, the most interesting part was actually the defense attorney, Geir Lipstad, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. He was a defense attorney who had to defend Breivik. He had to defend his human rights.
Right.
And I found that absolutely fascinating, and that gets to the heart of the question, right? Like, what do we do as a society? Does this individual who discriminately killed more than 60 children for no other reason than the fact that he doesn't want people of color inside of Norway, does he deserve to stand trial as anyone else does or should or would?
Do his rights deserve to be respected, even when he has so blatantly disrespected and flouted the rights of others?
Absolutely. And that, to me, was fascinating, and I loved seeing that interplay between the defense attorney and his family. I don't know if this happened in real life, but with the defense attorney, once Breivik calls him to his defense, so he didn't seek him out. I don't know if this, again, is based on real events, but
right.
The defense attorney was called by Breivik to defend him, and so he's like, well, it's my job, I have to defend him. So he chooses to defend him, and then he starts to get death threats to his family at his home. Somehow people know his number, and they're calling to say, look, how can you defend this monster? I know where you live. He has to take his children out of school because the school is worried of societal reprisal against him defending this terrorist and mass murderer. And I just found that really interesting. And here's this individual upholding perhaps what he should be doing, and the very society that he is trying to protect in defending Breivik is attacking him.
Right. Well, that's kind of like the quandary, I guess, that you face, in that if you what Breivik, we've been saying his name so differently.
I think it's Breivik.
It's Breivik.
Yeah.
I will commit to that from now on.
Excellent radio host. Watches an entire movie. Can't remember how names are pronounced.
But obviously, when somebody does something like this, that's so terrible, it boggles like human comprehension that a single person could take 77 lives. There's understandably like desires for revenge, for retribution, for violence against this person,
yeah.
And yet allowing ourselves to descend into that sort of state would be confirming what Breivik thinks about people. It would be I don't want to say a letdown, but it would go against like the very tenets of the society that Breivik has betrayed, and it would be like we would just be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something like you. I found those moments with Geir interesting. I wanted more of that. I would have liked to have gotten inside his head, because he does say, like, when he meets Breivik, he talks about Breivik said that they met a few years earlier when Geir defended a neo-Nazi during a trial, and that's how he first learned of him. And he's like, "Oh, I knew I'd need a lawyer someday."
Yeah.
And I want to know more. I want to hear, like, from Geir what his belief is. I mean, I can infer it, and maybe I'm just like a very literally minded person where I like to have people like speak up sometimes. But we see that scene where he gets a death threat, and we know that that's happening because he's a lot, because he says, like, his wife asks him, for example, who called, and he's like, "Oh, it was from the office," and she's like, "That's the third one tonight." So, and then there's a shot of her, like, looking morose. So I think it's implied that she knows what's happening too, that he's like trying to protect her from what's going on. And then later in the movie, yeah, his the principal or teacher at the school where his daughter goes asks them if they might leave because all of the other parents are worried with his daughter going to the school and him being like the attorney for a well-known mass murderer. They're worried that somebody might attack the school. But throughout the whole film, Gere never really confides in anybody. He shoulders all this by himself. He never talks to anybody about what he's going through or why he's doing what he's doing. And maybe it is just as simple as I believe that every person, no matter how terrible their crimes, is deserving of these basic human rights. But I wanted to, I don't know, I feel like this movie invites deep and nuanced discussion, and it didn't necessarily provide anything to the sort.
That's what we're here to do.
Yes, here we are, Jason.
So I agree with you in that it could have gone deeper, and this defense lawyer is still practicing in Norway, and I'd be very curious to hear from him or any other lawyers who have defended these mass killers and terrorists.
Here. Are you listening?
Yeah, 585-219.
How do you say your name? I'm sorry.
Yeah, call in 585-219-8889 if you're listening out there in Norway. But I agree, Matt, that it could have gone deeper, and I think that where this tension arises and where further conversation could be had in the trial around Breivik himself. And so the whole question begins with, should this individual even stand trial? If someone murdered your son or daughter indiscriminately on behalf of political beliefs that are terrible, aka white nationalism, should this individual even stand trial? And I think that's a great question to start with. And I can imagine that so many people would just want vengeance.
Right.
From the get-go. Shouldn't stand trial. Kill him. I'll kill him myself. Or something like that. Something terrible like that. And it just... So there's that basic question. But what I found so interesting is that in the movie, and I believe in real life too, the defense team and Breivik agreed to plead insanity. Meaning that there was a scene where they're talking about the only way we can defend his actions is if he's insane.
Right. I don't know, because I did a little bit of reading on the actual events. I don't know if Breivik actually agreed to plea for insanity. I know that he was evaluated and that he was found insane by a team of psychologists. And I remember reading that the actual Breivik was very upset at that initially because he wanted to use the trial as his soapbox, basically, to espouse his beliefs.
Absolutely. And so that's the point where he, whether or not it really happened or movie or whatever, let's talk about the point here. The point is that he, is pleading insane. And so the idea is he wouldn't actually stand trial, and a lot of people would be guilty about that because it's like, oh, this person is just going to end up in an insane asylum, and we're not getting the justice we deserve, even though he'd be locked away.
Right.
But what ends up happening is, I found this horribly chilling, almost as scary as the actual shooting on the island, is when Breivik is talking about, the terrorist is talking about a third attack. He's always kind of hiding his cards, saying, look, I can command a third lone wolf attack at any time. Right. The first attack was his car bombing. The second attack was a shooting on the island. And there's a scene with him and his defense lawyer saying, no, the third attack is me standing trial.
Yeah.
And the defense lawyer says, you're the one on trial, Breivik.
Not Norway.
Not Norway. And he says,
Are you sure about that?
Are you sure about that? And I got such chills from that because the idea is, by giving this person this platform, it becomes a political and social referendum on white nationalism to some regard.
Right.
And so what do you do then? That's the catch-22 you talked about. You have to uphold the rule of law in this instance, I think, but at the same time, do white nationalists deserve the same treatment?
Well, I read that scene in two ways, like you said, both as Breivik obviously views Norway on trial for his own beliefs of, we need to put an end to multiculturalism, we need to put an end to immigrants coming into the country. But I also viewed it as Norway being on trial for whether it would be able to grant him those basic human rights by having a trial to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think this has nice parallels with a sentiment that I've seen expressed often in more liberal communities, where a lot of people in the past 2 years have been talking about, well, the past year especially, ever since Charleston.
Charleston, South Carolina, with the white nationalists who drove a car into a crowd and ended up killing Heather Heyer, one individual.
That's right. Which was in August of last year.
Yeah.
Ever since Charleston, there's been a lot more discourse in more liberal communities about how to engage with people who express white nationalist and even neo-Nazi beliefs. And a lot of people have said or espoused the belief that you can't, because by giving the idea is that if you legitimize their platform, neo-Nazis will not give you the same favor. They will not.
Right.
Their entire platform is about delegitimizing the platforms of people of color, of Jewish people, of feminists, of homosexuals, people in the LGBTQI community. And personally, it's a sentiment that I've kind of leaning towards, honestly, because there are just certain ideas that are so toxic they simply cannot be permitted or allowed into the daily public discourse.
I've really struggled with that, and I know we've gone back and forth, Matt, too, where typically I'm on the side of treat the individual as an individual, give him the human rights, because if we make exceptions, then the human rights are no longer universal human rights. And who's to say what should be a universal human right? But I don't know the answer. And again, we're not walking away from this film with an answer. We need to have a discussion about it. I'm walking away too, wondering too, should we give Richard Spencer, who's one of the leaders of the alt-right, white nationalist, whatever movement, he dresses up as a suit and looks really nice and professional and is articulate and educated. Should we treat this individual as we would any other individual? I don't know. The whole point of the First Amendment is the hope that more people, as in right-minded people who want the inclusive social contract society, would end up shouting down Richard Spencer. But with the problem is that we've never dealt with this as a society with social media. That is the problem, is that at any time across the planet, using robots or real human beings, we can construct these horrible battles that are ripping people apart mentally, emotionally, online, never seeing someone face to face. And we can't tell if real people are doing it, but we can't tell if robots are pushing them. And that's what I'm worried about, is I can deal with the court of law thing. I think it was right for Breivik to stand trial, because I can deal with the court of law. I don't know what we do with Facebook, this private company that has a platform for billions of human beings' expressions. Many of them are literally basket of deplorable expressions. And I'll use that term. I don't know what we do about that.
Yeah, the hope that I have always is that these ideas will be confronted and flat out refuted by the general public, that people in the street will stand up and say, none of this, we don't accept this, this isn't who we are, this isn't who we're going to be. And we have seen that, which is comforting to see. But it's scary. It's scary to think that, these ideas have precedence, and that they captured a country, a nation of people. Not everyone, but Nazis were in power at one point. Yeah. And it could happen again.
There were, and maybe still are, elected white nationalists in the U.S. government, and they were enacting state terrorism against people of color for centuries. And So let's turn our attention now. I want to spend just a few moments on the responses of leaders to these incidences. And so, again, listeners, this is 100.9 FM WXIR, of course. Thank you for tuning in. And Matt and I are here talking about the film 22 July, of the actions of a lone wolf terrorist in Oslo, Norway on the 22nd of July in 2011 who killed 77 people, and he was a member of the alt-right, he was a white nationalist, and we're talking about that film 22 July, and we're wondering, how should society treat these individuals? How should we respond as a society when there are people with really heinous and deplorable ideas who commit horrible acts of violence? How should we treat them? Do we give them the respect and dignity of so-called human rights, or do we just lock them up? And as our President of the United States would say about some terrorists in the Middle East, do we just kill their families? Horrible things like that. And so I want to just read a quote from the leader Jens Stoltenberg, who was the Prime Minister of Norway at the time. This is what he says in the film to the press, his first public appearance to the press after the attacks happened. So again, this is the quote from the film. I'm guessing this is based upon real events too, but I should have done the research on that. So this is the quote from Jens Stoltenberg, the Prime Minister, reacting to the shooting by Anders Breivik in the film. And he says, "Our nation has been attacked by someone who would see it changed, who would see our democracy become a tyranny, who would see our humanity fall. We must not give in to this terror. We must fight. But we must not become changed. Instead, we must strengthen our values and fight this terror with the rule of law, not the barrel of a gun." And so I would agree with that sentiment expressed by Stoltenberg in terms of trying to be a moral leader, as the Prime Minister or President would need to do in this instance. Whenever there's horrible acts like any school shooting or anything like that, we need a moral leader. We need our presidents and other political leaders to come out and redirect us on a path of our values, because that's what's going to glue us together. And so for Stoltenberg, it's the rule of law. But I want to play a clip from President Obama. This was in 2016. It happened in January of 2016 by President Obama. So again, that was the last year of his presidency, around 2 years ago, January 5th, 2016. Obama was talking about proposed executive action on gun control. And this was in the context of the San Bernardino shooting that happened in California. Happened a month before this. It was a few months before the shooting in Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, the deadliest shooting in American history, I think. So it was within this context of just mass shootings that were still in American society, of course. And here's about a 1-minute clip of what Obama said during his speech on proposed executive action on gun control.
Our right to peaceful assembly. That right was robbed from moviegoers in Aurora and Lafayette. Our unalienable right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those rights were stripped from college kids in Blacksburg and Santa Barbara and from high schoolers at Columbine and from first graders in Newtown. First graders. And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad.
Matt, have you heard that before?
Well, it's interesting that you played this clip, or you brought this clip today. I don't think I've heard this before, but I remember thinking during the movie when the Norwegian Prime Minister met with the families of the victims on Utøya. I remember thinking about the pictures taken of President Obama meeting with the parents of the kids from Newtown, and I'm sorry, what was the Norwegian Prime Minister's name?
Jens Stoltenberg.
When Stoltenberg apologized to them and said, like, we failed you, essentially. I think, maybe I'm just remembering this wrong, but I think I remember Obama saying something similar when there was a great big push after Newtown to enact stronger gun legislation, and it failed. And I think he said something similar to that that we had failed, that he had failed, him and the government had failed the country by not passing those bills. Yeah, it was very. I don't even know how to describe it. It was so surreal and strange to see a politician telling people we messed up and we need to do better, when for so long all we've been told is that there's nothing we can do about this and that our hopes and prayers are with you, but that's it.
I completely agree, and I played this clip because it has always struck with me. I remember watching this live, and there's a lot of silence in the clip. Again, this is Obama speaking in 2016 on proposed executive action on gun control, and he ends up wiping away tears in that. And I didn't think that presidents could cry. Like, I know that sounds silly, but I first of all, this is a man. Second of all, he's the president. Third of all, he's making a formal political speech. And I just was so shocked seeing Obama cry. And I know it's happened before. You know, Obama has shed tears. Chuck Schumer famously shed tears. And other politicians and people shed tears because we're human beings, right?
Right.
But I just was so shocked by that. And it really helped me. It really helped me to see him be weak. Well, you could call that weakness, right? I don't think it's weakness. But it really helped me to see him show vulnerability.
Yeah.
And it really helped me at the very end when he says, you know, it makes me so mad every time I think about those kids. And here's our moral and political leader, the most powerful man on the planet, saying essentially that, look, this is tough. This is tough. And I think that helps, you know. I don't need to go there, but we're not getting that at all out of our current leader at all. You know, America First is essentially the complete denial of any self-reflection at all. America First is essentially just constant vengeance. Vengeance on made-up harm done to America. And, you know, I'm not saying there is real harm out there, folks, but if you've listened to the show, you get my point in that it's economic harm caused by the 1%. It's not harm caused by black or brown people who come from other countries, right? And so America First is essentially constant vengeance and is completely so far away from what I got from Obama in that clip saying, this is rough, but we kind of have to stick it out. And I think, too, getting to your point, Matt, that in that clip from the film 22 July, when Jens Stoltenberg, the Prime Minister, is talking to families of the children who were murdered by the terrorist Anders Breivik, where he says, look, the government has failed you. And the people, again, I don't know if this really happened in real life, but the people in the film said, look, the fault lies with the terrorists. We still need you. And that really gave me the fuzzies, you know, because it was like, it was like, that's the whole point of the social contract, right? Is that I know things messed up, but we still need you. And I often think as a society, we're too quick to judge those in power of like what's working and what's not. I think this happens with the economy all the time. And like, ooh, the economy, Trump's done it. Obviously, Obama's done it because look at the graphs, people. Like the way the economy is performing now is not because of Trump. But long story short, even Obama, one person does not control the economy, right?
Right.
And so often we as voters put up politicians on a referendum of things that they don't have control over. And I think we have a responsibility to step back from that a little bit and not hold people accountable. You know, it is not Jens Stoltenberg's individual fault that this individual carried out this terrorist incident. Perhaps it's all of our faults, right? By not speaking up when we should against white nationalism, racism, segregation, poverty.
Right. Yeah, I was heartened by that scene too, because it is sort of a. I don't know if we've talked about it much on this show, but the idea of victim blaming, which is if you leave your car unlocked accidentally, for example, and somebody steals like something inside of it, oh, you should have locked your car.
Yeah.
Or, you know, any number of things could happen. And we always sort of like, there's this real pull to rationalize that if we just do the right thing, we can avoid harm. And that's enticing in some way because we want to believe that we can avoid harm, essentially. Mm-hmm. But what ends up happening is that you put an undue amount of responsibility on people who get injured. And then the thing to always remember is that when something criminal happens, it's the criminal's fault. I feel like, I mean, that seems, that should go without saying, but I feel like that this isn't always necessarily the case sometimes, and that people should be reminded of that every so often. And it was nice to see the parents say that even if that entire exchange was fictional in the film, it was a nice point to make, I felt.
Yeah, there was another scene that gets to that point, Matt, in the film 22 July, where Breivik is lamenting about the people that Geir Lipstad, his defense lawyer, has called for Breivik's defense. He's lamenting about the lack of good people he has in his defense, and he's sort of frustrated and raging in his cell. And his defense lawyer says, or Breivik asks, is there no one that you can find for my defense? And he says, it seems like you're the only one who can be held accountable for your actions.
Yeah.
Something to that effect. And, I felt that rather compelling in that we have to take both sides, right? You are only ever solely responsible for your actions, but at the same time, society creates the conditions under which you act.
Yeah. And there is I don't know how, there are reports, and it was never brought up in the trial, I believe, but there may have been, Breivik was probably abused as a child. He grew up with his mother. His parents divorced at a young age, and it's reported, though I think it's not confirmed, and I don't believe it was found suitable to bring up during the trial, that he was probably physically abused and even sexually abused by his mother. And so, like you said, Jason, Breivik's actions are his own, but Breivik himself is something that we're all responsible for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really well said. We're all responsible for I think we are all somehow responsible for the formulation of white nationalism. I think you can make that argument, knowing that we should be doing a better job at articulating multiculturalism and at being honest in creating a society in which racism and segregation and, again, poverty don't exist. I think if more people spoke up against those things, as opposed to couching them as other problems, like you said, hard work, you're not working hard enough, it was your fault, this or that. So there's this tension between, look, it's your individual fault, and also society's fault too. And I think this is the whole point of this messy discussion, is to figure that out. But I don't think there's as many instances of sort of white terrorism out there if other white people spoke up more about not wanting racist segregationist policies in societies, And it just so happens that, at least in America, most of the instances, I think all the instances I know of mass shootings, we've talked about this before, happen from white males. Not universally, of course, but
an overwhelming majority.
Overwhelming majority of people who are very angry about society happen to be white males who just so happen also to benefit the most from how society is structured. And I'm saying that as a white male. It's not that hard of a stretch, So I think we're complicit too, and all of us, and we have to just articulate more, hey, poverty's not the best thing, and why do we have horrible segregation in the North?
Yeah.
As bad, or if not worse, since Jim Crow, Brown versus Board,
Racism is not the way.
Yeah. And so, I guess, folks, in just the last few minutes here, if you want to call in, weigh in on anything that we've been talking about, it's 585-219-8889. Also, evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com. You are listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR. And Matt and I, we've been talking today about the film 22 July, which covers the actions of a lone wolf terrorist in Norway in 2011 who took the lives of 77 people because he did not like the policies of the somewhat liberal progressive Norwegian government on immigration, multiculturalism, and he wanted to get people who were black, brown, and practiced religions like Islam out of the country. And so he committed these terrible acts in an effort to try to be found sane, as in, look, I knowingly and willingly committed these acts of violence because I am defending my Norwegian people. And that was what he was trying to do.
I am defending my Norwegian people.
By killing
the Norwegian people.
Yes, but that's what he's trying to do, and that's what he was trying to be found. Like this is a sane individual who committed these political acts because he's trying to defend his country. And I think there are people out there who are doing that today too. And honestly, I know this film has gotten some criticism because it's in English, not Norwegian. You know, they should have English subtitles, and also it's on a very sensitive topic. But honestly, I think that the film is for an American audience because we are living through a time right now where we need to think very carefully as a society about how we treat other people and how we create a social contract that works for everyone. And I don't think we're doing the best job of that right now with the current administration. But I think this film was for an American audience, and it was for Americans to see and think about.
I believe the whole cast was Norwegian, too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Matt, why we did this whole show? Yes. 1 out of 10 stars, buddy. 1 out of 10 stars.
6.
Yeah, you can check out the film on Netflix. Well, folks, I want to remind you that the midterm election is November 6th. It is too late to register to vote now if you haven't registered to vote yet, to vote in time by the November 6th midterm election. But the November 6th is the midterm election. You can vote for candidates because that's what happens when you vote. In a democracy is you vote for political candidates, and political candidates will represent you in government.
Thanks for that definition.
And I'm going to really lay this out here. And it's just important. It's important to vote.
Blowing my mind.
So please consider, it's important to vote. Please consider it. And you can look, if you don't know where to vote, if you don't know if you're registered to vote, you can do it online in a million different ways. Just go to Google and type in.
I believe it's too late to register at this point.
Yeah. But just if you don't know if you're registered,
right.
You can go online and Google, am I registered to vote? And you can follow any number of websites there.
You could register now and vote in the next election.
Right.
Get involved.
Get involved.
It's good for you. It's good for me. It's good for everybody.
And listen to Evidence of Design. We're going to take you out, though, with a song by Lord Huron. It's called Way Out There. Really want to thank you all for listening to Evidence of Design here at 100.9 FM WXIR. I was your host, Jason Taylor, joined by my good friend and buddy and still bald, Matt.
Hey.
Friend Matt.
I feel like that was an attack on my character.
No, I love it, man. I love it. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.